Ladies and gentlemen, this is your final boarding call for the good ship SS Tomorrow.
Today on The Friendly Futurist, it flows through all things, but it's not the Force. And welcome back to another episode. And I know I left a little cryptic clue. No, I haven't turned to religion. I said, what flows through everything, but it's not the Force. The truth is design thinking. Everything you see around you, your smartwatch, your phone, your chair, your desk, your car, at some stage has a designer getting inspired and laying the foundations for the manufactured goods in our lives. But also remember that everything in humanity is a construct. So today's guest is all about big picture thinking. His name is Jason Perelson. He's from Canberra. He goes by the name of That Ginger Guy. And he's talking about a concept about upside down thinking. But we also going to discuss lateral thinking, big pictures ideas, get you inspired, because sometimes things might happen by chance, by accident, that could really change the world. And I hope this gives a bit of inspiration to do something out there and go for it. So we're all about positivity on this show. We're all about cautious optimism on this show. We're all about pushing the boundaries of what's possible for humanity on this show. So Jason is joining us after the break. And welcome back to another episode, and we're continuing our theme this series about big picture thinking and what that entails, because sometimes you just need to pause and look at what's happening around the world rather than just consume media, which always talks about doom and gloom. It's not what this podcast is about. It's about cautious optimism at the end of the day. I've got a special guest. He's Jason Perelson. He joins us over from Canberra. I hope it's not too cold for him. Jason, welcome.
Thank you, Dave. I really, really appreciate being here. A couple of hours distance away.
So as with all my guests, Jason, can you give my listeners a quick rundown about your journey so far and just start wherever you want to start?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I appreciate that. Look, I think, I'll try and fast forward through the first 20 years or something like that. I was an immigrant to Australia 10 years ago, came over with my wife and had my two wonderful boys born here as fair dinkum Aussies with a blue passport. And my background has always been in human behavior and human experience and creativity, originally in broadcasting and social media, even when digital media and things were called new media in some businesses, if you can, for those old enough to remember it was called new media, then I really found my straps through ad agency originally, but then very much in the sort of creative strategy side of it. And for the last 6 years, I've been here in Canberra building a business called Creative People, which is a combination of the creative agency style of thinking about the world with real smarts in people, organization, culture. We work a lot with government, but it is very much about how do we create positive impact in the world, but leveraging the way in which people engage, their human experience, that psychological connective thread, and that sort of advertising lens of it is really how we connect with people at an emotional level, or we connect with behavioral design that fits in that. And sort of my passion and my expertise and background really is in that behavioral design, human engagement, that real fuzzy, weird thing that humans are. And that's really what I've spent a tremendous amount thinking about, talking about. And I really enjoy that. And I think creativity is the one thing that'll fundamentally change the world for the better.
Yeah, I do like design too. I teach my students designs like the Force in Star Wars. It flows through everything. Yeah. And it really just opened their eyes up once they realised in the chairs they're sitting on, someone had the bright idea to design it that way.
Yeah, you want me with a Star Wars reference as well. But there's even a wonderful thing about even that chair example where, if you think about how weird and wonderful your brain is and about the stimulus that it experiences and the amount of messages that the brain processes. And Daniel Kahneman, in his work with Thinking Fast and Slow, talks about system 1 and system 2 as the way of sort of understanding your brain system, and your fast subconscious system processing a million miles an hour, and your slow rational brain is the one that we think makes all the decisions, but it's actually the other one, where things like a chair. And if you stop and change gear and you suddenly force yourself to think about, what does the fabric of that chair feel like when I'm sitting on it? Or what does it actually feel like when my feet are on the ground? And you suddenly pay attention to that and you realize, oh, I can actually feel this or that. Your brain is constantly taking all of this in, but shutting it down. Otherwise you would absolutely melt. And so it's just these fascinating principles where creativity can really tap into how the brain works and how to support people in that mission.
Yeah. So this is leading on to your big idea, which is upside down thinking. I'm on the right track in terms of upside down thinking? This is what it entails?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The thing with upside down thinking is, and to be fair, I have no idea why that particularly came to me. Maybe it was a Stranger Things reference at the time. Who knows? But it's really this idea that, and I'm not the first to talk about it, the world is teeming with these problems that logic alone just has fundamentally failed to solve. It's really about seeing a problem. And instead of just approaching it head on and, just looking at it and saying, oh yeah, we can do that. It's just this idea of tilting your head sideways or squinting a little bit, and letting the right brain, that system 2, play a little bit of a part, and saying, what if we looked at this completely differently? So it is that principle, as if you were upside down and you looked at something, what would it look like? What would it feel like? How would you approach that problem? We see so many strategies, and particularly if I think about the government lens, when you're looking at how do we implement a policy or how do we put something into place that can bring a job seeker through COVID, all of those things. But if you approach it through an analytical lens, you will deliver an analytical solution, and humans don't work analytically. So that approach allows you to reframe the way you think. And there's a lot of work done in dialectical thinking, which is putting the two different opposite ideas or contradicting ideas together and using that to spark creativity. And there are some psychological studies as well that, particularly in the range of the dialectical thinking, that really talks about where too many assumptions can be made. Because if you also try and place a framework around thinking, you can very often paint all of thinking and all of creativity with a very Western, Anglo, white, male mindset. And it is just not fundamentally possible. So what I really talked about a tremendous amount with upside down thinking is it's not a framework. It's just a way of thinking. It's almost permission to allow yourself to just think about the world differently. It's just encouraging the idea of looking at the world differently. I think that's the real main principle is, if we look at the world the way we've always looked at the world, we're going to provide a view that we've always had. And then we're going to get to a solution we've always had. And that's what I want to avoid. And that's really the principle of upside down thinking.
Yeah, I guess too that we probably need to shift away from that analytical thinking, because AI, is going to have a bit of a crash before we're going to see more general intelligence. That's going to do all the logical, analytical stuff. We need to really add the spice. I guess the word get analogy. Add the human touch, add the creativity, add the bits that machines can't do. They haven't got a conscious, they haven't got a soul.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that is the real crux of what we need to be doing as we move towards AI, is really thinking about how we play a part in that world and how all of that connects, really. And we've seen that shift. If you think about how things have changed since 2020, you've seen those big shifts in how we're moving along, and even how that's spurred on AI as an example.
I guess too, this is Brad's point a lot on this podcast. We probably are moving into a bit of a renaissance, because our renaissance follows in history. Precedent has followed a pandemic. So I think this probably put more of my story is we probably should put more value and education into arts and humanity as much as science.
Absolutely. And to your point about the kind of the Renaissance, and like the Renaissance with the capital R was sort of following the Black Death, what's that, 14th century odd. And what was really interesting is a weird word to use in the context of the Black Death, but particularly as it sparks the Renaissance. You think about the way it actually decimated the European population. But what is interesting and the thing that sort of spurs Renaissance is if you think about what it almost forces out of society was, well, then labor became incredibly scarce.
Yes.
And then with scarcity, it drives price, supply, and demand.
Mhm.
So then your workforce could demand higher wages. They could demand better conditions. And then because of that, that has the flow-on effect of then what does that mean for the way in which society can come together? And so if you then cast that lens to COVID, and sure, COVID was not as devastating as the Black Death, but still pretty awful for a tremendous amount of people. And what COVID did, almost overnight, it showed us how those rigid barriers that had always controlled how we did things melted away. If you think about how you've got to be in the office, we have to do it this way, services have got to be delivered a particular way, you could not, make vaccines fast, all of those things suddenly were not a thing anymore. Suddenly services were delivered from home. Suddenly people working in different ways. Suddenly everything changed. That in and of itself is a renaissance.
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting is what might be a different way of thinking about the impact of COVID. Maybe it won't be a full renaissance in its traditional sense, but you're almost going to get little pockets of renaissances, little renays, because what I think it really did was it really showed monumental inequalities in society. It showed huge barriers to the access of services through COVID. It showed huge issues in how we see and are divided as a society. And that I would like to see being a real part of what we come out of it was. I think what I worry about is with this, a modern system that we exist in, the news cycle is the thing that really defines what is our most important issue. Whereas Black Death, that was the thing for so long. It was what everyone felt and talked about, where we've almost gone off the pandemic now.
Yeah.
You think back in 2024, that was ages back. That was, a lifetime ago, only 4 years ago. And even then, that was the beginning. We're still seeing the tail end of it, but we've now moved into this real politically divisive discourse. Left and right has never been said so many times in the news as now. And I worry that it actually detracts from what we can do. And there's got to be a way of bringing that back, bringing ways of benefiting is also another word that I'm hesitant to use in the context of a pandemic, but, benefiting from what we've learned. What have we learned? What can we do? How can we bring society together? And that is what I want to see as many people as possible, like you, talking about what we can do and bring that together. What does the future look like? That's going to keep us on the right track in at least some ways.
Yeah. Well, actually, I do recommend a book if you haven't read it already called Apollo's Arrow by Nicholas Christakis. He's a medical anthropologist from Harvard. And there's 3 stages of the pandemic. There's the contagion, which we went through. We're now going through what's known as the correction. So this is where all the price, we're going to have the cost of living crisis, prices go up, labor crisis. In the US, we're seeing the resurgence of the labor union movement. And I'll say we're going to see a similar thing in Australia very shortly. And that's going to be years of just turmoil before, guess what? We're over it. We had a massive celebration, and that's where the Renaissance really kicks in. I think we're on track, and people just don't realize we're in the middle of probably one of the biggest tidal waves of society. And we're probably, for the first time, actually conscious about it. I think it's just a very interesting time to live in. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a wonderful point you make. I love that idea of actually just being conscious about it, because that is so true. And that's actually a really good book recommendation. I haven't read it, so that's going to go on my list. Yeah. But I think that's a really good, also grounding point in that we're only in that middle phase. It's that working through, because actually the cost of living is shocking and people are having it incredibly tough. But there's a light at the end of the tunnel. There is a move through, which is very, very hard to grapple on when you're in the middle of that mud. But there is a future up there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad I found some like-minded individual on this podcast. Now, as this podcast is about the future, is there any advice for any youngsters? I know if you do tune into my podcast from time to time, have you got any advice for younger generations coming through about the future?
I think so. There's a line that I've said a million times because I just absolutely love it. It's sort of my mantra, I guess, if you like. Nothing exists. Everything is made up. As a species, we are, at least as much as we know, the only ones able to create fiction. We create anything. We have incredible, beautiful, incredible, imaginative, creative minds, and we can create a fiction. And so my advice is to remember that pretty much nothing exists and everything is made up. The barriers that we keep amongst ourselves, the ways in which we can't do things, the constructs of so much in society is made up. A business doesn't exist, it's made up. Currency doesn't exist, it's made up. Everything is just a construct. The stronger a thing is, the more solid it becomes based on the volume of people to believe it to be so. So if you think about things like currency, things like rules, everyone believes that is the rule, and therefore it is. And that's a good thing. These are good things. We can't just have a world of complete and utter chaos.
Yep.
But having the volume of people that can connect to what that looks like, and understanding that with a smaller amount of belief, or the way in which you can shift that belief, can also really impact the change of that. So if fewer people believe something to be true, it becomes less solid. COVID, all of the rules that were absolutely solid because we all believed the truth, then we suddenly stopped believing it was true and suddenly it melted away. We suddenly realized nothing exists. Everything is made up. So for young people, particularly when you may have a society who says, you're not yet old enough to have a view on this topic. You haven't spent enough time in the workforce. You don't, you can't do this, you can't do that, or all of those things don't actually exist. Now, fundamentally follow the rules of good moral code, and, don't break laws and stuff and then go, oh yeah, but nothing exists. But if you really apply that to what's possible in the world, and you actually start to think about what is truly, truly impossible, you'll start to find that actually the things that are truly impossible are probably very, 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 very small. And more of what we believed was impossible is probably maybe improbable, or maybe it's just probable. Yeah. And maybe it's just about trying. And I think that is so key, particularly for young people, because that's where innovation will live. That is where the future lives. That is what's coming. And we need people that think like that.
Excellent. And speaking of the future, how do you envision the world, say, in the 2030s and beyond?
Look, I'm an eternal optimist. So I would like to think and believe that things will be far better. I'm concerned that I'm wrong, but I do really think it will be. Look, I think the world of the hoverboards is long gone in terms of those monumental leaps that we're going to see all Back to the Future, but which is now actually quite old.
But in the past now.
I think 2030 will feel probably quite similar to now, given it's not that far away. However, I think we're going to see real changes in the normalization of what we feel is so emerging right now. So AI, AI and Internet of Things, I think will be far more systematic into how we live. You talked about the sort of the crash and then the build of that bubble. I think you're absolutely right. The novelty will wear off, and then we'll get into the nuts and bolts of how we're going to make it. I think we'll see smart cities become a much, much stronger piece of what we're doing through AI and the Internet of Things. And I think we'll see smart homes and urban improvements and the way in which people work together being a real key. And I think we'll see a much, much clearer and greater understanding and engagement with sustainability, and particularly with emerging technology in that area. And I'd like to think particularly in regenerative systems, because that's a real emerging perspective on regenerative design, regenerative systems, but also the way in which, we've seen it with regenerative agriculture quite a lot, but I don't know, RMIT do a lot of work in this space, and it's quite a big push for it, but I think we'll see that in regenerative accounting, business, governance. I think there is so much that will come through, and we'll start to really recognize how that comes together. And that's going to be a real interesting place to play in, because that, I think, will be the thing that supports society to be able to focus on the things that we need to focus on, social inequality, social justice, those areas. And I think the next 6 years are going to give us that steering point to whether or not I am just being optimistic and whether I should be far more apprehensive, or whether that is a pathway to go. Because if we can get enough around the goodness of that story, we'll absolutely move in that way.
Absolutely. And is there anything I didn't ask but should?
What's interesting, and it's more just off the connective threads to all of that, you didn't have to ask it, but we can just talk about it, is the digital ethics of it all. I think ethical AI and ethical AI development will be really important around what we do going forward and how we get there. Because, there's already a huge conversation, particularly in generative AI, about IP and artist rights. But the story about fairness and the accountability and transparency that needs to be built into the principles of the ethical AI. And how do we encourage that sort of positive application of it when it's used for a social good? Because there is such a risk of AI playing a monumental role in destabilization through misinformation and disinformation. And so making sure we can build those frameworks in and that we have a real key comprehensive digital rights framework that can protect individuals and their freedoms online, and making sure that governments and organizations are able to really work together and then create those sort of free and effective regulations, I think will be really, really important, because those are those things where if you think about from a hypothetical situation where without the right digital ethics in play, your decision-making can be so skewed in so many ways. Cast your mind, I mean, we have a humanized version of that if you think about sort of the 2016 US election and the impacts of that and supposed government interferences and all of those alleged things that happened. The way in which AI can do that at scale is frightening. And it is very much that, in the wrong hands, the tools can be used in so many different ways. So that's that constant battle of being near peer in terms of the defensive versus offensive use of it.
Yeah. I do like to raise the point. It is a tool, and it's a very valid point. The same way as a kitchen knife. So it's a could be a murder weapon, can create your lunch. It's just the grey matter behind it that has that intention. It's what makes it gives it the morals behind it, or lack of morals behind it.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Well, Jason, I've enjoyed our chat this morning. Before I let you go, where else can we find you?
I mean, other than milling about in Canberra, the easiest places to find me are probably on, LinkedIn. Otherwise, there's my website, ginger.au. And, being a podcast, the listeners won't know, Ginger. So therefore, that's where it comes from. So those are the best places to find me. Yeah. And yeah, Dave, I absolutely appreciate it, and particularly everything that you do in terms of championing the future and all things for the friendly futurist.
Yeah. Pleasure's all mine. I'm glad to be of service. Jason, thank you very much for chatting to us this morning.
Thank you, Dave.
And that's a great way to wrap up 2024. Now, we'll be back. The next flight of the SS Tomorrow will be taking off early in the new year. Drop this date down. It's Thursday, the 23rd of January 2025, where we'll continue with Season 14 of The Friendly Futurist. Now, The Friendly Futurist is our podcast West production. It's produced and edited by me, Dave Monk. If you love the show, best thing to do is leave us a 5-star review on your favourite platform, hit that subscribe button, and tell the world about this great little podcast I've started. I'm not tied to any big media conglomerate. I'm doing this independently. I'm doing this at love all things innovation, technology, science, a little bit of marketing, but just to get you out there and inspired. So friends, thank you for listening in 2024. Have a Merry Christmas, a safe and prosperous 2025, and I'll see you in January. Until then, stay curious, and the future is user-friendly.
Another Podcasts West production.
This podcast is just for educational purposes and it's not financial advice. I'm not a financial planner or advisor. Please do your homework and seek professional help before you take on any adventures.